Hey there. Thanks for being here tonight, or this morning, or maybe some in-between hour when the world is quiet and your mind is open. Tonight's story isn't about knights in shining armor or royal banquets in golden halls. It's about what life actually felt like in the Middle Ages. The cold floors, the hunger, the faith, the fear, and the quiet strength it took just to survive another day. If you enjoy wandering into the past like this, not for nostalgia, but for understanding, you're welcome to subscribe or like the video, only if it feels right. And if you're up for it, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always something special, seeing all of us, from different corners of the world, stepping into history together. So settle in. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Let the noise of the day fade out. And when you're ready, we'll begin. Waking up in a medieval setting was an experience far removed from the comforts we often take for granted today. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the small, grimy window, casting a dim light over the cramped quarters. The air was thick with the musty scent of damp straw, a reminder of the makeshift mattress that served as a bed. This mattress, filled with straw, was not only uncomfortable but also a breeding ground for bugs. As one stirred from sleep, the sensation of tiny insects crawling across the skin was a common and unwelcome wake-up call. The discomfort of the prickly straw combined with the incessant itch of bites left many feeling restless and irritable before the day had even begun. In this communal living space, privacy was a luxury few could afford. Families often shared their quarters with livestock, a necessity in a time when animals were vital for survival. The sounds of snorting pigs, clucking chickens, and the occasional bleating of goats filled the air, creating a cacophony that was both familiar and unsettling. As one opened their eyes, the sight of a cow or sheep nestled in the corner was not unusual. The mingling of human and animal life was a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of existence in the medieval world, where every creature played a role in the daily struggle for sustenance. Without the modern amenities we enjoy today, such as soft pillows or clean bedding, the experience of waking up was often jarring. Instead of sinking into a plush mattress, one would rise from a hard, lumpy surface that offered little support. The absence of pillows meant that many would simply rest their heads on a rolled-up piece of cloth or a bundle of straw, which did little to alleviate the discomfort of a night spent tossing and turning. The lack of clean bedding was another harsh reality. Washing sheets was a rare occurrence, and the accumulation of dirt and sweat over time made for an unpleasant sleeping environment. As the day began, the chill of the morning air seeped into the room, making it difficult to shake off the remnants of sleep. The cold stone walls offered no insulation, and the thinness of clothing provided little warmth. Rising from the straw mattress, one would often feel the sharp contrast between the warmth of the bed and the biting cold of the floor. The struggle to get out of bed was compounded by the knowledge that the day ahead would be filled with labor and toil, with little respite in sight. In the communal living space, the morning routine was a chaotic affair. Families would jostle for space as they prepared for the day, often stepping over sleeping animals or dodging the occasional tail swish from a nearby cow. The lack of personal space meant that every action was performed in close quarters, with little regard for privacy. The clatter of wooden utensils and the smell of cooking porridge filled the air as breakfast was hastily prepared, often consisting of simple fare that left much to be desired. The reality of waking up in such conditions was a stark contrast to the idyllic images often portrayed in stories and films. There were no leisurely mornings spent sipping coffee or enjoying a warm croissant. Instead, the focus was on survival and the relentless demands of daily life. The harshness of the environment was a constant reminder of the fragility of existence, where every day was a fight against the elements and the uncertainties of life. As one ventured outside, the world was equally unforgiving. The streets were often muddy and littered with waste, a testament to the lack of sanitation that plagued medieval towns. The sight of people trudging through the muck, their shoes caked with filth, was a common one. The absence of modern conveniences meant that hygiene was a luxury few could afford, and the consequences of this neglect were evident in the prevalence of disease and illness. In this medieval setting, waking up was not just a transition from sleep to wakefulness. It was a harsh reminder of the realities of life. The discomfort of a straw mattress, the lack of modern amenities, and the chaos of communal living all contributed to an experience that was both challenging and formative. Each morning brought with it the promise of hard work and the necessity of resilience, as individuals faced the day with a determination forged by the struggles of their existence. The experience of waking up in a medieval world was a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure. Despite the discomfort and the harsh realities, there was a sense of community that emerged from shared struggles. Families relied on one another for support, and the bonds forged in the face of adversity were often unbreakable. As the day unfolded, the challenges of survival became a collective endeavor, with each member of the household playing a vital role in the quest for sustenance and security. In conclusion, waking up in a medieval setting was an experience defined by discomfort, chaos, and resilience. The harsh realities of life during this time were starkly different from the romanticized versions often depicted in popular culture. From the discomfort of sleeping on a straw mattress filled with bugs to the lack of modern amenities and the challenges of communal living, each morning was a reminder of the struggles faced by those who lived in this era. Yet, amidst the hardships, there was a sense of community and determination that defined the human experience, showcasing the strength of the spirit in the face of adversity. In the medieval period, the morning rituals of daily life were steeped in necessity and practicality, shaped by the harsh realities of the time. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the landscape, the first task for many was to navigate the challenges of personal hygiene and sanitation, which were far removed from the conveniences we enjoy today. The absence of modern bathrooms meant that the concept of privacy was virtually non-existent. Instead, people relied on makeshift solutions, such as buckets or chamber pots, which were often kept in the corners of their living spaces. This arrangement not only posed significant hygiene issues, but also created social implications, as the act of using a bucket was a communal affair that stripped away any semblance of dignity. In many households, the morning began with the unpleasant task of emptying these buckets. The contents were often disposed of in the streets or in designated areas outside the home, leading to a pervasive stench that lingered in the air. The lack of proper sanitation facilities meant that waste management was a constant concern, and the social implications of this reality were profound. People had to navigate the delicate balance of maintaining cleanliness while also dealing with the inevitable mess that came with communal living. The absence of privacy during these moments was a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of life in medieval society, where personal boundaries were often blurred by necessity. Communal latrines, when they existed, were another grim aspect of morning rituals. These shared facilities were typically little more than wooden structures with holes over a pit, offering little in the way of comfort or cleanliness. The lack of privacy was palpable, as individuals would often find themselves waiting in line, surrounded by others who were equally eager to relieve themselves. The sounds and smells of the latrine added to the unpleasantness of the experience, making it a task to be rushed through rather than savored. The communal nature of these facilities meant that conversations could occur, but they often revolved around the shared discomfort of the situation rather than any meaningful exchange. The absence of walls or partitions left little room for modesty, and the experience was a stark reminder of the realities of life in a time when personal hygiene was a luxury few could afford. After navigating the challenges of sanitation, the next step in the morning ritual was breakfast, which was often a grim affair. For many medieval people, the first meal of the day consisted of pottage, a thick stew made from whatever ingredients were available. This could include grains, vegetables, and occasionally meat, but the quality and quantity varied greatly depending on one's social standing and access to resources. Pottage was typically cooked in a large pot over an open fire, and it was common for families to eat from the same vessel, dipping their spoons into the communal dish. The texture of pottage was often unappealing, with a consistency that could range from watery to overly thick, and the flavor was usually bland, lacking the spices and seasonings that we might expect in modern cuisine. The consumption of weak ale was another staple of the medieval breakfast. Water was often unsafe to drink due to contamination, so ale became a common alternative, even for children. This weak ale, brewed from barley or other grains, was low in alcohol content, but provided a source of calories and hydration. The act of drinking ale in the morning was not unusual. It was simply a part of daily life. However, the taste was often far from pleasant, and the quality could vary significantly based on the brewing methods and ingredients used. For many, the combination of pottage and weak ale constituted a meager breakfast that did little to sustain them for the long day ahead. As the morning progressed, the challenges of daily life continued to mount. After breakfast, individuals would often have to prepare for the labor that awaited them, whether it was tending to livestock, working the fields, or engaging in trades. The physical demands of these tasks required a level of endurance that was cultivated through years of hard work and limited nutrition. The morning rituals, therefore, were not just about sustenance. They were a prelude to the relentless grind of medieval existence. The social dynamics of these morning rituals were also significant. Families often gathered together to share their meager meals, fostering a sense of community and togetherness despite the discomforts they faced. The act of eating from a communal pot, while lacking in privacy, created bonds among family members and neighbors. Conversations during breakfast often revolved around the tasks of the day, the challenges of the previous night, or the latest news from the village. This shared experience, while marked by unpleasantness, was also a vital aspect of social life, reinforcing the connections that held communities together. In addition to the physical challenges, the psychological toll of these morning rituals should not be overlooked. The discomfort of using a bucket or a communal latrine, combined with the grim reality of breakfast options, contributed to a sense of resignation that permeated daily life. For many, the morning was a reminder of the struggles they faced, and the monotony of their routines could weigh heavily on their spirits. Yet, amidst the hardships, there was also a resilience that emerged from these experiences. The ability to adapt to such conditions was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, as individuals found ways to cope with the challenges of their environment. In conclusion, the morning rituals and challenges faced by medieval people were defined by discomfort, communal living, and the harsh realities of survival. The absence of modern bathrooms and the social implications of using a bucket highlighted the lack of privacy and sanitation that characterized daily life. Communal latrines added to the unpleasantness of the experience, while grim breakfast options like pottage and weak ale provided little in the way of nourishment. Yet, through these rituals, individuals forged connections with one another, navigating the complexities of their existence with resilience and determination. The morning was not just a time to prepare for the day ahead. It was a reflection of the struggles and triumphs that defined life in the medieval world. In the medieval period, clothing and personal hygiene were closely intertwined with the realities of daily life, reflecting both social status and the harsh conditions of the time. The wardrobe options available to individuals were limited, often dictated by their economic circumstances and the resources at hand. For the majority of the population, clothing was functional rather than fashionable, designed primarily for durability and warmth. Peasants and laborers typically wore simple garments made from coarse wool or linen, which were often hand-measured and sewn. These garments consisted of tunics, trousers, and cloaks, with little variation in style or color. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to finer fabrics such as silk and velvet, but even their wardrobes were limited by the prevailing fashions of the time, which favored modesty and practicality over extravagance. The lack of cleanliness was a pervasive issue in medieval society, exacerbated by the limited wardrobe options available to individuals. Most people owned only a few sets of clothing, which meant that garments were worn repeatedly without the benefit of washing. The concept of hygiene as we understand it today was largely absent. Bathing was infrequent, and many believed that water could spread disease. As a result, clothing became soiled and stained, accumulating dirt, sweat, and odors over time. The discomfort caused by wearing untreated clothing was significant, as the rough fabrics could irritate the skin, and the weight of multiple layers added to the burden of daily life. Moreover, the prevalence of lice was a common issue that plagued individuals across all social classes. These tiny parasites thrived in the seams and folds of clothing, making their homes in the unwashed garments that were worn day after day. The sensation of lice crawling on the skin was a constant source of discomfort, leading to itching and irritation. People often resorted to various methods to combat these pests, such as using heated combs or applying herbal remedies, but the effectiveness of these treatments was limited. The presence of lice not only affected personal comfort, but also had social implications, as individuals were often judged by their appearance and cleanliness. The inability to rid oneself of lice could lead to social ostracism, further complicating interactions within communities. In addition to the challenges posed by clothing, personal hygiene extended to dental care, or the lack thereof. Dental hygiene in the medieval period was rudimentary at best. Most people did not have access to toothbrushes or toothpaste as we know them today. Instead, they might have used a cloth or a twig to clean their teeth, if they engaged in any form of dental care at all. The absence of proper dental hygiene led to a host of oral health issues, including decay, gum disease, and bad breath. The impact of these issues on social interactions was significant. Individuals with visibly poor dental health often faced stigma and were sometimes avoided in social settings. The sight of rotting teeth or the smell of bad breath could deter potential friends or suitors, making it difficult for individuals to form connections or maintain relationships. The social implications of clothing and personal hygiene were particularly pronounced in a society that placed great importance on appearances. In medieval Europe, one's clothing was a reflection of their social status, and cleanliness was often equated with respectability. The wealthy could afford to have their garments cleaned and repaired, while the poor were left to make do with what they had. This disparity created a visible divide between classes, with the well-to-do often looking down upon those who appeared unkempt or dirty. The inability to maintain a clean appearance could lead to social exclusion, as individuals were judged not only by their clothing, but also by their overall hygiene. The discomfort caused by untreated clothing and the prevalence of lice were compounded by the realities of daily life. For laborers and peasants, the physical demands of their work meant that they often returned home covered in dirt and sweat, further soiling their already limited wardrobe. The cycle of wear and neglect made it difficult to maintain any semblance of cleanliness, and the harsh conditions of their environment only exacerbated the situation. The lack of access to clean water and bathing facilities meant that many individuals were resigned to living with the discomfort of their circumstances. In contrast, the wealthy had the means to maintain a more polished appearance, but even they faced challenges in the realm of personal hygiene. While they could afford to change their clothing more frequently, the lack of understanding about hygiene meant that they, too, were susceptible to issues like lice and dental decay. The social pressures to appear refined and respectable often led to a focus on outward appearances rather than genuine cleanliness. The use of perfumes and scented oils became common among the upper classes, as these products were employed to mask unpleasant odors rather than address the underlying issues of hygiene. As we examine the clothing and personal hygiene of medieval individuals, it becomes clear that these aspects of life were deeply intertwined with social dynamics and daily challenges. The limited wardrobe options available to most people meant that cleanliness was often an unattainable goal, leading to discomfort and social stigma. The prevalence of lice and the absence of dental hygiene further complicated personal interactions, creating barriers to social engagement and acceptance. In a society where appearances mattered greatly, the inability to maintain a clean and respectable image could have lasting consequences on one's social standing and relationships. In conclusion, the clothing and personal hygiene of medieval individuals were marked by limitations and challenges that shaped their daily lives. The lack of cleanliness, discomfort from untreated clothing, and prevalence of lice created a reality that was far from ideal. Additionally, the absence of dental hygiene had significant implications for social interactions, as individuals navigated a world where appearances were paramount. The interplay between clothing, hygiene, and social status highlights the complexities of life in the medieval period, revealing a society that grappled with the realities of existence while striving for dignity and connection amidst the challenges they faced. The life of a medieval peasant was characterized by a relentless cycle of labor and responsibility, primarily centered around agricultural work. For the vast majority of the population, the day began before dawn, as the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Peasants were expected to rise early to tend to their fields, livestock, and household chores, with little time for rest or respite. The nature of agricultural work was grueling, demanding both physical strength and endurance. From plowing the fields to sowing seeds and harvesting crops, the tasks were labor-intensive and often performed under harsh weather conditions. The absence of modern machinery meant that every aspect of farming relied on manual labor, making the work even more arduous. The daily routine of a peasant was structured around the agricultural calendar, with specific tasks assigned to different seasons. During planting season, peasants would spend long hours in the fields, often working from sunrise to sunset without breaks. The expectation was that they would push through fatigue and discomfort, as the success of their crops directly impacted their survival. The lack of breaks was a harsh reality. Even when the sun beat down mercilessly or rain poured down, peasants were expected to continue working. The pressure to produce enough food for their families and to meet the demands of their lords created an environment where rest was seen as a luxury that could not be afforded. Women and children played crucial roles in the household and agricultural work, often taking on responsibilities that were just as demanding as those of the men. Women were expected to manage the home, which included cooking, cleaning, and caring for children, in addition to assisting with agricultural tasks. They would often work alongside their husbands in the fields, planting and harvesting crops, while also tending to livestock and maintaining the household. The expectations placed on women were immense, as they were responsible for ensuring that the family was fed and cared for, all while managing the myriad tasks that came with running a household. Children, too, were expected to contribute from a young age. As soon as they were able, they would assist with simple tasks, such as gathering firewood, tending to smaller animals, or helping with the planting and harvesting of crops. The work was often physically demanding, and children were expected to learn the skills necessary to contribute to the family's survival. This early introduction to labor meant that childhood was often cut short, as the realities of peasant life required them to grow up quickly. The expectation that children would work alongside their parents created a sense of shared responsibility, but it also meant that they missed out on the joys of a carefree childhood. The physical toll of labor on the body was significant for medieval peasants. The repetitive nature of agricultural work, combined with the lack of proper nutrition and rest, led to a range of health issues. Many peasants suffered from chronic pain, joint problems, and fatigue as a result of their demanding labor. The harsh conditions of their environment, including exposure to the elements and the physical strain of their work, took a toll on their overall well-being. Injuries were common, whether from accidents in the fields or from the wear and tear of daily labor. However, the absence of social support meant that there were few resources available to address these health issues. Peasants often had to rely on their own resilience and the support of their families to cope with injuries or illnesses, as medical care was limited and often inaccessible. The lack of social support extended beyond physical health. It also encompassed emotional and psychological well-being. The isolation of rural life meant that peasants often had limited opportunities for social interaction outside of their immediate families. While communities were tight-knit, the demands of daily labor left little time for leisure or socializing. The burden of work and the constant struggle for survival created an environment where stress and anxiety were commonplace. The absence of a support network to address these emotional challenges meant that many peasants faced their struggles alone, compounding the difficulties of their existence. In addition to the physical and emotional toll of labor, the responsibilities of a medieval peasant were further complicated by the feudal system. Peasants were often bound to the land they worked, obligated to provide a portion of their harvest to their lord in exchange for protection and the right to cultivate their plots. This system created a cycle of dependency that left peasants with little control over their lives. The demands of their lords added another layer of pressure, as failure to meet these obligations could result in severe consequences, including loss of land or increased taxation. The constant threat of economic instability loomed over peasant families, making their already challenging lives even more precarious. As we examine the work and responsibilities of medieval peasants, it becomes clear that their lives were defined by a relentless cycle of labor and obligation. The grueling nature of agricultural work, combined with the expectations placed on women and children, created a demanding environment that left little room for rest or recovery. The physical toll of labor on the body, coupled with the absence of social support, meant that peasants faced significant challenges in their daily lives. Despite the hardships, however, there was a sense of resilience and community among peasants, as they relied on one another to navigate the difficulties of their existence. In conclusion, the work and responsibilities of a medieval peasant were marked by a relentless cycle of labor, obligation, and struggle. The grueling nature of agricultural work, the expectations placed on women and children, and the physical toll of labor all contributed to a challenging existence. The absence of social support further compounded these difficulties, leaving peasants to navigate their lives with limited resources and little respite. Yet, amidst the hardships, the resilience of the human spirit shone through, as individuals and families worked together to survive in a world defined by their labor and determination. The life of a medieval peasant was one of endurance, shaped by the realities of their environment and the demands of their society. The impact of weather on daily life in the Middle Ages was profound, shaping the experiences of individuals and communities in ways that were both immediate and far-reaching. The medieval period was characterized by a reliance on agriculture, and as such, the seasons dictated not only the rhythm of work, but also the very survival of families. The challenges posed by winter and summer weather were significant, affecting everything from living conditions to health and hygiene. Winter living in the Middle Ages was particularly harsh, especially for those who were not part of the wealthier classes. Most peasants lived in simple one- or two-room homes, constructed from timber, wattle, and daub, with thatched roofs. These structures offered little in the way of insulation, making them ill-equipped to withstand the biting cold of winter. As temperatures plummeted, the chill would seep into the walls, leaving families shivering as they huddled together for warmth. The lack of proper heating meant that fires were essential for survival, but even the warmth from a central hearth could only do so much. Smoke filled the air, creating a suffocating atmosphere that was both uncomfortable and unhealthy. The constant battle against the cold left many individuals susceptible to illness, as the dampness and chill could lead to respiratory problems and other health issues. The challenges of winter living extended beyond mere discomfort. They also had significant implications for nutrition and food security. With the ground frozen and snow covering the fields, agricultural work came to a standstill. This meant that families had to rely on stored provisions, which often dwindled as the winter dragged on. The lack of fresh produce and the reliance on preserved foods could lead to nutritional deficiencies, further weakening the body and making individuals more vulnerable to illness. The struggle to stay warm and fed during the winter months was a constant source of anxiety for medieval families, as they faced the harsh realities of their environment. As the seasons changed and summer arrived, the challenges of daily life shifted dramatically. The heat of summer brought its own set of difficulties, particularly for those engaged in agricultural work. Long hours spent in the fields under the blazing sun could lead to exhaustion and dehydration. The lack of modern conveniences, such as shade structures or cooling systems, meant that peasants had to endure the sweltering heat with little relief. The discomfort of summer heat was compounded by the realities of personal hygiene, which were often neglected during this time. With limited access to clean water and the absence of bathing facilities, many individuals struggled to maintain basic cleanliness. The combination of sweat, dirt, and the pervasive odor of unwashed bodies created an environment that was not only uncomfortable, but also detrimental to health. The lack of personal hygiene during the summer months had significant implications for social interactions and community dynamics. The unpleasantness of body odor and the visible signs of dirt could lead to social stigma, as individuals were often judged by their appearance and cleanliness. The absence of proper hygiene practices meant that diseases could spread more easily, particularly in crowded living conditions. The heat of summer, combined with the lack of cleanliness, created a breeding ground for pests such as lice and fleas, further exacerbating the discomfort of daily life. The constant struggle against the elements in both winter and summer had a profound impact on health. The physical toll of enduring extreme temperatures, whether from the biting cold or the sweltering heat, left many individuals vulnerable to a range of health issues. Respiratory illnesses were common during the winter months, while heat-related ailments such as heat exhaustion and heat stroke could occur in the summer. The lack of access to medical care meant that many individuals had to rely on home remedies or the knowledge of local healers to address their ailments. However, the effectiveness of these treatments was often limited, and the absence of proper health care exacerbated the challenges faced by medieval people. Moreover, the unpredictability of weather patterns added another layer of complexity to daily life. Crop failures due to unexpected frost, drought, or heavy rains could devastate harvests, leading to food shortages and famine. The reliance on agriculture meant that the success of a family's livelihood was inextricably linked to the whims of nature. Poor weather conditions could lead to economic instability, forcing families to make difficult choices about how to allocate their limited resources. The constant uncertainty surrounding the weather created a sense of anxiety and vulnerability as individuals faced the harsh realities of their dependence on the natural world. In addition to the physical and economic challenges posed by weather, the psychological impact of living in such an unpredictable environment cannot be overlooked. The stress of worrying about the next harvest, the health of family members, and the ability to withstand the elements weighed heavily on the minds of medieval people. The struggle against the weather was not just a physical battle, it was also an emotional one, as individuals grappled with the realities of their existence in a world that often felt beyond their control. As the seasons changed and summer arrived, the challenges of daily life shifted dramatically. The heat of summer brought its own set of difficulties, particularly for those engaged in agricultural work. Long hours spent in the fields under the blazing sun could lead to exhaustion and dehydration. The lack of modern conveniences, such as shade structures or cooling systems, meant that peasants had to endure the sweltering heat with little relief. The discomfort of summer heat was compounded by the realities of personal hygiene, which were often neglected during this time. With limited access to clean water and the absence of bathing facilities, many individuals struggled to maintain basic cleanliness. The combination of sweat, dirt, and the pervasive odor of unwashed bodies created an environment that was not only uncomfortable, but also detrimental to health. The lack of personal hygiene during the summer months had significant implications for social interactions and community dynamics. The unpleasantness of body odor and the visible signs of dirt could lead to social stigma, as individuals were often judged by their appearance and cleanliness. The absence of proper hygiene practices meant that diseases could spread more easily, particularly in crowded living conditions. The heat of summer, combined with the lack of cleanliness, created a breeding ground for pests such as lice and fleas, further exacerbating the discomfort of daily life. The constant struggle against the elements in both winter and summer had a profound impact on health. The physical toll of enduring extreme temperatures, whether from the biting cold or the sweltering heat, left many individuals vulnerable to a range of health issues. Respiratory illnesses were common during the winter months, while heat-related ailments such as heat exhaustion and heat stroke could occur in the summer. The lack of access to medical care meant that many individuals had to rely on home remedies or the knowledge of local healers to address their ailments. However, the effectiveness of these treatments was often limited, and the absence of proper health care exacerbated the challenges faced by medieval people. Moreover, the unpredictability of weather patterns added another layer of complexity to daily life. Crop failures due to unexpected frost, drought, or heavy rains could devastate harvests, leading to food shortages and famine. The reliance on agriculture meant that the success of a family's livelihood was inextricably linked to the whims of nature. Poor weather conditions could lead to economic instability, forcing families to make difficult choices about how to allocate their limited resources. The constant uncertainty surrounding the weather created a sense of anxiety and vulnerability, as individuals faced the harsh realities of their dependence on the natural world. In addition to the physical and economic challenges posed by weather, the psychological impact of living in such an unpredictable environment cannot be overlooked. The stress of worrying about the next harvest, the health of family members, and the ability to withstand the elements weighed heavily on the minds of medieval people. The struggle against the weather was not just a physical battle, it was also an emotional one, as individuals grappled with the realities of their existence in a world that often felt beyond their control. In conclusion, the impact of weather on daily life in the Middle Ages was significant and multifaceted. The challenges of winter living without proper insulation created a harsh environment that affected health, nutrition, and overall well-being. Conversely, the discomfort of summer heat, coupled with the lack of personal hygiene, further complicated the lives of medieval individuals. The constant struggle against the elements shaped not only the physical landscape of daily life, but also the emotional and psychological experiences of those who lived through it. The interplay between weather and human existence in the medieval period serves as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity, as individuals navigated the complexities of their environment with determination and fortitude. In the Middle Ages, medical practices were characterized by a rudimentary understanding of human anatomy and disease, heavily influenced by superstition, tradition, and the limited scientific knowledge of the time. The prevailing medical theories were often based on ancient texts, particularly those of Galen and Hippocrates, which emphasized the balance of bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, as the key to health. This understanding led to a variety of treatments that, while well-intentioned, often did more harm than good. One of the most notorious practices of the time was bloodletting, a method believed to restore balance among the humors by removing excess blood from the body. Physicians would use leeches or make incisions to draw blood, often without considering the patient's overall health or the specific ailment being treated. This practice was widely accepted and persisted for centuries, despite its questionable efficacy and the potential for severe complications. The reliance on bloodletting exemplified the broader challenges of medieval medicine, where treatments were often based on theory rather than empirical evidence. Patients suffering from a range of ailments, from fevers to infections, were subjected to this practice in hopes of alleviating their symptoms. Unfortunately, bloodletting could lead to significant health risks, including weakness, shock, and even death. The lack of understanding of the human body meant that many medical practitioners were ill-equipped to provide effective care, and patients often left their consultations in worse condition than when they arrived. In addition to the dangers posed by misguided medical practices, the prevalence of untreated injuries and diseases was a significant health challenge during the medieval period. Life was fraught with risks, from accidents in the fields to injuries sustained during battles or skirmishes. The absence of antiseptics and proper wound care meant that even minor injuries could quickly become infected, leading to serious complications. Without access to effective treatments, many individuals succumbed to infections that would be easily treatable today. The lack of surgical knowledge further compounded these issues. Procedures that could have saved lives were often avoided due to fear or ignorance. The prevalence of disease during the Middle Ages was another critical aspect of health challenges faced by the population. Epidemics, such as the bubonic plague, swept through Europe, decimating entire communities and leaving a lasting impact on society. The Black Death, which struck in the mid-14th century, is estimated to have killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. The rapid spread of the disease was exacerbated by poor sanitation, crowded living conditions, and a lack of understanding of how diseases were transmitted. The symptoms of the plague were horrific, including fever, chills, and painful swellings known as buboes. The inability to effectively treat or contain such diseases led to widespread fear and despair, as communities struggled to cope with the loss of life and the social upheaval that followed. Religion played a significant role in the understanding of health and illness during the Middle Ages. Many people believed that diseases were a punishment from God for sins or a test of faith. As a result, individuals often turned to prayer, penance, and other religious practices in hopes of achieving healing or divine intervention. Monasteries and convents became centers of care, where monks and nuns provided rudimentary medical assistance alongside spiritual guidance. While some religious institutions did contribute to the preservation of medical knowledge through the copying of texts and the establishment of infirmaries, the overall reliance on faith rather than science limited the effectiveness of treatments available to the general population. The lack of effective treatments for common ailments further compounded the health challenges of the time. Herbal remedies were widely used, but their efficacy varied greatly, and many were based on folklore rather than scientific understanding. While some herbs had genuine medicinal properties, others were ineffective or even toxic. The absence of standardized medical training meant that anyone could claim to be a healer, leading to a proliferation of charlatans and quacks who exploited the desperation of the sick. Patients often had little recourse to seek out qualified care, and the result was a healthcare system that was fragmented and unreliable. In addition to the physical ailments and diseases, the mental health of individuals during the Middle Ages was often overlooked. The stigma surrounding mental illness meant that those suffering from conditions such as depression or anxiety were frequently marginalized or misunderstood. Many believed that mental health issues were the result of demonic possession or moral failing, leading to further isolation and suffering for those affected. The lack of understanding and compassion for mental health challenges meant that individuals often faced their struggles alone, compounding the difficulties of their existence. The interplay between medical practices, health challenges, and societal beliefs during the Middle Ages created a complex landscape for individuals seeking care. The reliance on bloodletting and other misguided treatments reflected a broader lack of understanding of human health, while the prevalence of untreated injuries and diseases underscored the dangers of living in a time without effective medical interventions. The role of religion in health, while providing some comfort and support, often limited the ability of individuals to seek out practical solutions to their ailments. As we reflect on the medical practices and health challenges of the Middle Ages, it becomes clear that the period was marked by a struggle for survival in the face of ignorance and adversity. The combination of misguided medical theories, the prevalence of disease, and the influence of religious beliefs created a healthcare landscape that was fraught with challenges. Despite the hardships, the resilience of individuals and communities shone through as they navigated the complexities of their existence with determination and hope. The lessons learned from this era continue to resonate today, reminding us of the importance of understanding health through a lens of compassion, knowledge, and evidence-based practice. In conclusion, The medical practices and health challenges of the Middle Ages were defined by a rudimentary understanding of medicine, a reliance on ineffective treatments like bloodletting, and the pervasive threat of disease. The dangers of untreated injuries and the influence of religion on health further complicated the lives of individuals during this time. As we examine this period, we gain insight into the struggles faced by medieval people and the resilience they exhibited in the face of adversity. The legacy of their experiences serves as a reminder of the importance of advancing medical knowledge and the need for compassion in the pursuit of health and well-being. The food sources and dietary habits of medieval people were deeply influenced by the agricultural practices of the time, the seasons, and the socio-political landscape. The majority of the population, particularly peasants, relied heavily on what they could grow or raise themselves, leading to a diet that was often monotonous and limited in variety. The absence of effective food preservation methods further complicated the situation, as the risk of spoiled food was a constant concern. In the absence of modern refrigeration or canning techniques, medieval people faced significant challenges in preserving their food. Most preservation methods were rudimentary at best, relying on techniques such as salting, drying, or smoking to extend the shelf life of meats and fish. While these methods could be somewhat effective, they were not foolproof. Spoiled food was a common issue, particularly during warmer months when bacteria could thrive. The risk of foodborne illnesses was high, and many individuals suffered from gastrointestinal ailments as a result of consuming spoiled or contaminated food. The lack of understanding of hygiene and food safety meant that people often had to rely on their senses, sight, smell, and taste, to determine whether food was safe to eat, which was not always a reliable method. The limited variety of meals available to medieval people was another defining characteristic of their dietary habits. For the majority of the population, especially those in rural areas, the diet was largely based on grains, legumes, and vegetables. Bread was a staple food, often made from barley, rye, or oats, depending on what was available. Pottage, a thick stew made from a mixture of grains, vegetables, and sometimes meat, was a common dish that provided sustenance for many families. This one-pot meal was easy to prepare and could be made with whatever ingredients were on hand, making it a practical choice for busy households. However, the reliance on pottage also meant that meals could become monotonous, lacking in flavor and variety. The absence of spices and seasonings, which were often too expensive for the average person, further contributed to the blandness of the diet. For wealthier individuals, the diet was somewhat more varied, with access to a wider range of foods, including meats, fish, and imported spices. Nobles and those in higher social classes could afford to indulge in more elaborate meals, often featuring roasted meats, pies, and a variety of fruits and vegetables. However, even among the wealthy, the diet was still heavily influenced by the seasons and local availability. The reliance on fresh produce meant that meals could vary significantly throughout the year, with winter months often leading to a scarcity of fresh ingredients. The political implications of food access were significant during the medieval period. The feudal system created a hierarchy in which land ownership and control over food sources were concentrated in the hands of a few. Lords and landowners had the power to dictate food production and distribution, often leaving peasants with limited access to the resources they needed to sustain themselves. This disparity created tensions between social classes, as the lower classes struggled to meet their basic needs, while the wealthy enjoyed abundance. The ability to access food was not just a matter of sustenance, it was also a reflection of power dynamics within society. The dangers of poaching further complicated the relationship between food access and social class. Hunting was often restricted to the nobility, and common people were prohibited from hunting game on lands owned by lords. This restriction created a desperate situation for many peasants who faced the threat of starvation during lean times. As a result, poaching became a common practice among those who sought to supplement their diets with wild game. However, the risks associated with poaching were significant. Those caught hunting illegally faced severe penalties, including fines, imprisonment, or even execution. The act of poaching was not only a means of survival, but also a form of resistance against the oppressive structures of feudal society. The reliance on local food sources meant that medieval people were acutely aware of the seasons and the cycles of nature. Agricultural practices were closely tied to the rhythms of the earth, with planting and harvesting dictated by the changing weather. The success of a harvest could mean the difference between life and death for many families, and the unpredictability of weather patterns added an element of uncertainty to food production. Poor harvests due to drought, flooding, or pest infestations could lead to famine, forcing communities to rely on stored provisions or seek assistance from neighboring areas. In addition to the physical challenges of food access, the psychological impact of food scarcity cannot be overlooked. The constant worry about where the next meal would come from created a sense of anxiety and stress for many medieval families. The fear of starvation loomed large, particularly during harsh winters or periods of drought. This anxiety was compounded by the knowledge that food was often a source of power and control, with those in positions of authority able to dictate who received sustenance and who did not. As we examine the food sources and dietary habits of medieval people, it becomes clear that their lives were shaped by a complex interplay of agricultural practices, social structures, and environmental factors. The lack of food preservation methods and the risks of spoiled food created significant challenges for individuals and families, while the limited variety of meals and reliance on pottage contributed to a monotonous diet. The political implications of food access highlighted the disparities between social classes, and the dangers of poaching underscored the lengths to which individuals would go to secure their survival. In conclusion, the food sources and dietary habits of medieval people were defined by a combination of necessity, limitation, and resilience. The challenges of food preservation, the reliance on basic staples, and the political dynamics surrounding food access all played a crucial role in shaping the experiences of individuals during this time. Despite the hardships, the ingenuity and resourcefulness of medieval people allowed them to navigate the complexities of their environment, finding ways to sustain themselves and their families in a world marked by uncertainty and struggle. The legacy of their dietary practices serves as a reminder of the importance of food security and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. During the Middle Ages, religion played a central role in the everyday lives of individuals, permeating every aspect of society from governance to personal conduct. The Church, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, wielded immense power and influence, shaping not only spiritual beliefs, but also the political and social structures of the time. This control extended to various facets of life, as the Church dictated moral standards, established laws, and even influenced the governance of kingdoms. The Church's authority was rooted in its perceived divine mandate, which allowed it to assert control over both the spiritual and temporal realms. Bishops and abbots often held significant political power, serving as advisors to kings and rulers. The intertwining of church and state meant that many aspects of governance were influenced by religious doctrine. For instance, laws were often based on biblical principles, and the Church had the authority to excommunicate rulers or impose interdicts, which could suspend religious services in a particular area, effectively wielding power over entire populations. This ability to influence governance created a system where the Church was not just a religious institution, but a formidable political entity that could shape the course of history. The fear of sin and the consequences of failing to adhere to religious practices was a pervasive aspect of medieval life. The Church taught that sin could lead to eternal damnation, and this belief instilled a profound sense of anxiety among the faithful. Confession became a crucial practice, as individuals sought to atone for their sins and secure their place in heaven. The fear of divine retribution was a powerful motivator for adherence to religious practices, and many people lived in constant vigilance, striving to avoid actions that could be deemed sinful. This fear was compounded by the Church's teachings on purgatory, a place where souls were believed to be purified before entering heaven. The notion of purgatory added another layer of anxiety, as individuals worried about the state of their souls and the potential for suffering after death. The Church also established a calendar of holy days and festivals that dictated the rhythm of life in medieval society. Sundays were reserved for Mass, and attendance was mandatory for all members of the community. The importance of Mass cannot be overstated. It was not only a religious obligation, but also a social event that brought people together. The communal aspect of Mass fostered a sense of belonging and reinforced the Church's role as a unifying force in society. However, the pressure to attend Mass was significant, as failure to do so could result in social ostracism or even punishment from the Church. The fear of being judged by one's peers added to the weight of this obligation, as individuals were acutely aware of the expectations placed upon them by their communities. The rituals and ceremonies associated with Mass were elaborate and filled with symbolism, reinforcing the Church's teachings and the importance of faith in everyday life. The liturgy, which included prayers, hymns, and the reading of Scripture, was designed to engage the congregation and instill a sense of reverence. The Eucharist, or communion, was a central component of Mass, symbolizing the body and blood of Christ. Participation in this sacrament was seen as essential for spiritual nourishment and a means of grace. The Church emphasized the importance of receiving communion regularly, further entrenching the idea that adherence to religious practices was vital for salvation. In addition to Mass, the Church played a significant role in marking life's milestones, such as baptisms, marriages, and funerals. These sacraments were not only religious ceremonies, but also social events that reinforced community bonds. The Church's involvement in these significant moments of life underscored its authority and influence, as individuals turned to the Church for guidance and support during times of transition. The rituals surrounding these events were steeped in tradition and served to remind individuals of their obligations to God and the community. The Church also sought to control moral behavior through the establishment of various religious orders and the promotion of ascetic lifestyles. Monastic communities, such as the Benedictines and Franciscans, emphasized the importance of piety, humility, and service to others. These orders played a crucial role in the spiritual life of the medieval world, providing education, healthcare, and support to the poor. However, the strict adherence to religious rules and the expectation of moral conduct created additional pressure on individuals to conform to the Church's standards. The fear of failing to live up to these expectations could lead to feelings of guilt and shame, further entrenching the Church's influence over personal lives. The Church's control extended beyond individual behavior to encompass broader societal issues, including education and the dissemination of knowledge. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving ancient texts and producing new works that reflected the Church's teachings. The Church's influence on education meant that religious doctrine was often intertwined with scholarly pursuits, shaping the intellectual landscape of the time. This control over knowledge further solidified the Church's authority, as it dictated what was considered acceptable thought and belief. Despite the Church's pervasive influence, there were also moments of tension and resistance. The rise of heretical movements, such as the Cathars and Waldensians, challenged the Church's authority and highlighted the complexities of faith during the Middle Ages. These groups sought to reform the Church and return to what they perceived as a more authentic expression of Christianity. The Church responded with fervor, often resorting to persecution and violence to maintain its control. The Inquisition, established to root out heresy, exemplified the lengths to which the Church would go to preserve its power and influence. In conclusion, the role of religion in everyday life during the Middle Ages was multifaceted and deeply ingrained in the fabric of society. The Church controlled various aspects of life and governance, shaping moral standards and influencing political structures. The fear of sin and the consequences of failing to adhere to religious practices created a pervasive sense of anxiety among the faithful. The importance of Mass and the social pressures surrounding it reinforced the Church's role as a unifying force in the community. While the Church provided a framework for understanding the world and a sense of belonging, it also imposed strict expectations that could lead to guilt and fear. The complexities of faith during this time reflect the enduring struggle between individual belief and institutional authority, a dynamic that continues to resonate in contemporary discussions of religion and society. During the Middle Ages, women faced a myriad of unique challenges that shaped their lives and experiences in profound ways. The societal structure of the time was heavily patriarchal, with rigid expectations and limited roles available to women. These constraints dictated not only their daily activities, but also their aspirations and identities. The expectations placed upon women were often rooted in traditional views of gender roles, which confined them primarily to the domestic sphere. Women were expected to marry, bear children, and manage the household, with little opportunity for personal agency or independence. The roles available to women varied depending on their social class, but for the majority, particularly those in lower classes, life revolved around the home and family. Peasant women worked alongside their husbands in the fields, tending to crops and livestock, while also managing household chores such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. The labor was physically demanding and left little time for leisure or personal pursuits. For women of higher social standing, the expectations were somewhat different, but they were still largely confined to domestic roles. Noble women were often tasked with managing estates, overseeing servants, and ensuring the well-being of their families, but their lives were still dictated by the needs and desires of their husbands and fathers. The limited roles available to women were compounded by societal pressures that dictated how they should behave and what they should aspire to. Virtue and chastity were highly valued, and women were often judged based on their adherence to these ideals. The concept of honor was closely tied to a woman's reputation, and any deviation from societal norms could lead to severe consequences. Women who were perceived as promiscuous or who failed to fulfill their roles as wives and mothers faced social ostracism and condemnation. The pressure to conform to these expectations created an environment where women often felt trapped, unable to express their individuality or pursue their own desires. Childbirth was one of the most significant challenges faced by women during the Middle Ages, fraught with danger and uncertainty. The lack of medical care and understanding of childbirth meant that many women faced significant risks during labor. Complications such as hemorrhaging, infections, and obstructed labor were common, and the mortality rate for both mothers and infants was alarmingly high. It is estimated that as many as 1 in 10 women died during childbirth, a statistic that underscores the perilous nature of this experience. The absence of trained midwives or medical professionals meant that many women relied on the assistance of family members or neighbors, often with little knowledge of proper care or hygiene. The dangers of childbirth were compounded by the societal expectation that women should bear multiple children to ensure the survival of the family line. This pressure to produce heirs placed an additional burden on women, as they were often expected to return to work shortly after giving birth. The physical toll of repeated pregnancies and the lack of recovery time could lead to long-term health issues, further diminishing a woman's quality of life. The societal narrative surrounding motherhood glorified the role of women as nurturers, but it often overlooked the harsh realities and sacrifices that accompanied this expectation. In addition to the physical dangers of childbirth, women also faced emotional and psychological challenges. The fear of losing a child or experiencing complications during labor could lead to anxiety and distress. The societal stigma surrounding infertility or the loss of a child added to the emotional burden, as women were often blamed for their inability to conceive or carry a pregnancy to term. The pressure to fulfill the role of mother could lead to feelings of inadequacy and despair, particularly for those who struggled with fertility or faced repeated losses. The societal pressures placed on women extended beyond childbirth and motherhood. The consequences of nonconformity could be severe, with women facing social ostracism, gossip, and even violence for failing to adhere to societal norms. Women who sought to assert their independence or challenge traditional roles were often met with resistance and hostility. The fear of being labeled as a witch or heretic was a very real concern, as women who deviated from accepted norms could find themselves accused of wrongdoing. The witch hunts of the late medieval period serve as a stark reminder of the dangers faced by women who stepped outside the boundaries of societal expectations. Education and access to knowledge were also limited for women during this period, further constraining their opportunities. While some noble women received an education, it was often focused on domestic skills rather than intellectual pursuits. The majority of women, particularly those from lower classes, had little access to formal education, which limited their ability to engage in discussions or advocate for their rights. The lack of education perpetuated the cycle of dependence on men, as women were often unable to secure employment or support themselves outside of marriage. Despite the challenges faced by women during the Middle Ages, there were instances of resilience and agency. Some women found ways to assert their independence, whether through managing family businesses, engaging in trade, or participating in religious life. Convents provided a space for women to pursue education and spirituality, offering an alternative to the constraints of marriage and motherhood. Women like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich emerged as influential figures, using their voices to challenge societal norms and contribute to theological discussions. In conclusion, the unique challenges faced by women during the Middle Ages were shaped by a complex interplay of societal expectations, limited roles, and the dangers of childbirth. The pressure to conform to traditional gender roles created an environment where women often felt constrained and powerless. The risks associated with childbirth, coupled with the lack of medical care, further compounded the difficulties of their lives. Societal pressures and the consequences of nonconformity added to the emotional and psychological burdens faced by women, creating a landscape where their worth was often measured by their ability to fulfill prescribed roles. Despite these challenges, women demonstrated resilience and agency, finding ways to navigate the constraints of their society and assert their identities. The legacy of their experiences serves as a reminder of the enduring struggle for gender equality and the importance of recognizing the contributions of women throughout history. The prevalence of violence in medieval society was a stark reality that permeated everyday life, shaping the experiences of individuals and communities alike. The justice system of the time was characterized by its brutality and arbitrariness, reflecting the harshness of the era and the limited understanding of law and order. Punishments for crimes were often severe and public, serving as a means of deterrence, but also as a spectacle that reinforced the power of the ruling authorities. Punishments in medieval society were notoriously brutal, often designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Common methods of execution included hanging, beheading, and burning at the stake, with public executions drawing large crowds eager to witness the grim spectacle. These events were not merely punitive. They were also a form of entertainment for the populace, reinforcing the authority of the state and the church. The gruesome nature of these punishments served to instill fear in the hearts of the people, as the consequences of wrongdoing were made painfully clear. For lesser offenses, punishments could include flogging, mutilation, or imprisonment in dark, dank dungeons. The arbitrary nature of justice meant that the severity of punishment often depended on the social status of the accused and the whims of those in power. Nobles could sometimes escape punishment altogether, while commoners faced the full brunt of the law for even minor infractions. The justice system was deeply intertwined with the feudal structure of society, where local lords held significant power over their vassals. This decentralized system meant that justice was often administered in a capricious manner, with lords acting as judges in their own domains. The lack of standardized laws and procedures led to inconsistencies in how justice was meted out, creating an environment where the powerful could manipulate the system to their advantage. Accusations could be made with little evidence, and the accused often had limited means to defend themselves. The reliance on trial by ordeal, where the accused would undergo painful tests to determine guilt or innocence, further exemplified the arbitrary nature of justice. The belief that divine intervention would protect the innocent meant that many were subjected to torturous methods, such as being submerged in water or forced to carry hot iron, with the outcome often determined by chance, rather than fairness. Domestic violence was another pervasive issue in medieval society, often overlooked or dismissed as a private matter. The patriarchal structure of the time meant that women had limited rights and were frequently subjected to the authority of their husbands. Domestic abuse was common, and women had little recourse to seek help or protection. The prevailing belief that a husband had the right to discipline his wife contributed to a culture of silence surrounding domestic violence. Women who spoke out against their abusers often faced social stigma and isolation, further entrenching their vulnerability. The lack of legal protections for women meant that many endured physical and emotional abuse in silence, fearing the repercussions of challenging the status quo. Public executions were a grim reality in medieval society, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of crime and the power of the ruling authorities. These events were often highly publicized, drawing large crowds who gathered to witness the punishment of wrongdoers. The spectacle of execution was designed to reinforce the authority of the state and deter others from committing similar offenses. However, the brutality of these events also desensitized the populace to violence, normalizing the idea that punishment could be both severe and public. The fear of being subjected to such a fate loomed large in the minds of individuals, contributing to a culture of compliance and submission to authority. The fear and uncertainty surrounding law enforcement were pervasive in medieval society. The absence of a centralized police force meant that maintaining order often fell to local lords or community members. This decentralized approach to law enforcement created inconsistencies in how laws were enforced and led to a reliance on informal systems of justice. Vigilante justice was not uncommon, as individuals took matters into their own hands when they felt the law had failed them. This lack of formal oversight contributed to a climate of fear, as people were often unsure of who to turn to for help or protection. The role of the church in the justice system further complicated matters. The church held significant power and influence, often acting as both a moral authority and a legal entity. Ecclesiastical courts had jurisdiction over certain offenses, particularly those related to moral or religious transgressions. However, the church's involvement in the justice system was not always a force for good. Corruption and favoritism were rampant, with wealthy individuals often able to manipulate the system to escape punishment. The church's focus on sin and redemption meant that many offenders were offered penance rather than punishment, leading to a perception that justice was not always served. The arbitrary nature of justice in medieval society created an environment where fear and uncertainty thrived. Individuals lived in constant awareness of the potential for violence, whether from the state or within their own homes. The brutality of punishments and the prevalence of domestic violence contributed to a culture of silence and compliance, as people navigated a world where the consequences of dissent could be dire. The lack of effective legal protections and the inconsistencies in law enforcement left many feeling vulnerable and powerless. In conclusion, the prevalence of violence and the justice system in medieval society were marked by brutality, arbitrariness, and fear. The harsh punishments meted out for crimes served as a means of deterrence, but also as a spectacle that reinforced the power of the ruling authorities. Domestic violence was a pervasive issue, often overlooked by a society that prioritized patriarchal authority over the well-being of women. The uncertainty surrounding law enforcement and the role of the church in the justice system further complicated matters, creating an environment where individuals lived in fear of violence and retribution. The legacy of this tumultuous period serves as a reminder of the importance of justice, equity, and the protection of individual rights in any society. The average life expectancy during the Middle Ages was significantly lower than what we consider today, with estimates suggesting that many individuals lived only into their 30s or 40s. This stark reality was shaped by a multitude of factors, including disease, poor nutrition, lack of medical care, and the harsh living conditions that characterized medieval life. The high rates of infant mortality further contributed to the overall low life expectancy, as many children did not survive past their early years. It is estimated that as many as 1 in 3 infants died before reaching their first birthday, a grim statistic that reflects the challenges faced by families during this period. Several factors contributed to the high rates of infant mortality and low life expectancy in medieval society. The lack of access to clean water and proper sanitation meant that diseases spread rapidly, particularly in crowded living conditions. Common ailments such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever were prevalent, and the absence of effective medical treatments left many individuals vulnerable to illness. Additionally, malnutrition was widespread, as the diets of the lower classes were often lacking in essential nutrients. Poor agricultural practices, coupled with the unpredictability of weather patterns, meant that food shortages were common, further exacerbating health issues. The combination of these factors created an environment where survival was a daily struggle, and the fragility of life was a constant reality. The lack of funerary practices and the speed of burials also reflected the harsh realities of death in the Middle Ages. When a person died, the response was often swift and pragmatic. Due to the lack of embalming techniques and the absence of refrigeration, bodies began to decompose quickly, necessitating rapid burial. Funerals were typically simple affairs, often taking place within a day or two of death. The deceased were usually buried in unmarked graves or simple wooden coffins, and elaborate funerary rites were reserved for the wealthy or noble classes. For the majority of the population, the focus was on practicality rather than ceremony, as families sought to dispose of the body as quickly as possible to prevent the spread of disease. The speed of burials also reflected the societal attitudes towards death during this period. Death was a common occurrence, and the frequency of loss meant that individuals often became desensitized to the realities of mortality. The high rates of infant mortality, combined with the dangers of childbirth and the prevalence of disease, meant that families were accustomed to grief and loss. As a result, funerals were often understated, with little fanfare or mourning. The emphasis was placed on the necessity of burial rather than the celebration of life, reflecting a pragmatic approach to death that was shaped by the harsh realities of existence. Societal attitudes towards death and the afterlife were heavily influenced by religious beliefs, particularly the teachings of the Catholic Church. The Church played a central role in shaping how individuals understood death, sin, and the afterlife. The prevailing belief was that life on earth was a temporary state, and the true existence awaited individuals after death. This belief in an afterlife provided some comfort to those facing the inevitability of death, as it offered the hope of salvation and eternal life. However, the Church also emphasized the importance of living a virtuous life to secure a favorable outcome in the afterlife, instilling a sense of fear regarding sin and the consequences of failing to adhere to religious teachings. The concept of purgatory was particularly significant in medieval thought, as it represented a transitional state for souls who had died in a state of grace, but still required purification before entering heaven. This belief added another layer of complexity to societal attitudes towards death, as individuals sought to ensure that their loved ones received proper rites and prayers to aid in their journey through purgatory. The Church encouraged the practice of offering masses for the deceased, which were believed to help alleviate the suffering of souls in purgatory. This emphasis on the afterlife and the need for intercession created a culture where the living felt a responsibility to care for the souls of the dead, further intertwining death with religious practice. Despite the Church's teachings on the afterlife, the realities of death often led to anxiety and fear among the populace. The unpredictability of life, coupled with the constant threat of disease and violence, meant that individuals were acutely aware of their mortality. The fear of dying unconfessed or in a state of sin loomed large, leading many to seek out confession and absolution in the hopes of securing a place in heaven. This anxiety was compounded by the lack of understanding of health and disease, as individuals faced the constant threat of illness without the benefit of modern medical knowledge. The high mortality rates and the prevalence of death in everyday life also influenced cultural expressions of grief and mourning. While funerals were often simple, the loss of loved ones was deeply felt, and communities would come together to support one another in times of grief. Mourning practices varied, with some families observing periods of mourning that could last for months or even years. The wearing of black clothing and the refraining from social activities were common expressions of grief, reflecting the societal acknowledgement of loss and the importance of community support. In conclusion, the average life expectancy and the realities of death in the Middle Ages were shaped by a complex interplay of factors, including disease, malnutrition, and societal attitudes. The high rates of infant mortality and the lack of funerary practices reflected the harshness of life during this period, where death was a frequent and often unceremonious occurrence. The speed of burials and the pragmatic approach to funerals underscored the realities of mortality, while societal attitudes towards death and the afterlife were heavily influenced by religious beliefs. The fear and uncertainty surrounding death, coupled with the hope of salvation, created a complex landscape where individuals navigated the challenges of existence with a deep awareness of their mortality. The legacy of this period serves as a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring human quest for meaning in the face of death. In this video, we have explored the multifaceted and often harsh realities of life during the Middle Ages, a period marked by significant challenges and profound resilience. From the struggles of daily existence to the societal structures that shaped individual experiences, the medieval era was a time of both hardship and tenacity. We began by examining the grueling agricultural work that defined the lives of peasants, who toiled long hours in the fields under the weight of societal expectations and the demands of their lords. The lack of modern conveniences and the constant threat of famine underscored the precariousness of their existence, as families faced the daily struggle for survival. We also delved into the realities of health and medicine during this time, highlighting the low life expectancy and the prevalence of disease. The absence of effective medical care, combined with the dangers of childbirth and the high rates of infant mortality, painted a grim picture of life in the medieval world. The speed of burials and the lack of elaborate funerary practices reflected a society that had become accustomed to loss, while the societal attitudes towards death and the afterlife were heavily influenced by religious beliefs. The Church played a central role in shaping these attitudes, offering both comfort and fear regarding the fate of souls after death. Moreover, we discussed the role of women in medieval society, emphasizing the limited opportunities available to them and the societal pressures they faced. The expectations placed upon women to fulfill domestic roles, coupled with the dangers of domestic violence and the harsh realities of childbirth, illustrated the struggles they endured in a patriarchal world. Despite these challenges, many women demonstrated remarkable resilience, finding ways to assert their agency within the confines of their societal roles. The prevalence of violence and the justice system in medieval society further highlighted the brutality of the era. The harsh punishments meted out for crimes, the arbitrary nature of justice, and the fear surrounding law enforcement created an environment where individuals lived in constant awareness of their vulnerability. Public executions served as grim reminders of the consequences of wrongdoing, reinforcing the power dynamics at play in medieval life. Throughout our exploration, we have seen how individuals navigated these challenges with resilience and determination. The human spirit's ability to endure in the face of adversity is a testament to the strength of those who lived during this tumultuous period. Their stories remind us of the importance of community, the value of perseverance, and the capacity for hope, even in the darkest of times. As we conclude this journey through medieval life, we invite you to reflect on the lessons learned from this era. The resilience of people in difficult times serves as an inspiration for us today, reminding us that even in the face of hardship, the human spirit can prevail. If you found this video insightful and engaging, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel for more historical content. By liking and sharing this video, you can help spread awareness of the fascinating stories from our past and inspire others to learn about the complexities of history. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of medieval life, and we look forward to sharing more captivating insights with you in the future.